Welcome to another edition of You and Your Money. I'm Brian Hurst. This evening we're focusing on healthcare. The majority of members, whilst concerned with costs of their medical aids, do not read the member's guide, and the few who do really find it very difficult to understand. A recent survey showed that only a small percentage of the respondents have actually read their guides thoroughly. Other areas that are highlighted show that there are many members who have brokers recorded, don't know who these brokers are, and have no contact to them. I've mentioned on numerous occasions that all brokers do earn a commission on most medical aids, but it does not cost you as the member anything. It is advisable to appoint a healthcare specialist that you're in contact with. Other areas of concern that call centres were very badly rated on, and they also found that their benefit structure very confusing. And joining this evening is Clayton Samsudin. He's Group CEO of Phoenix FSG. Clayton, once again, good to have you on the program.
Thank you, Brian.
You know, the big question really, which you've gone through now, is the question of upgrading or downgrading. And when do you do it and how do you know? And that's why I made the point when we started on the program, having a broker, because very difficult for members to understand what it actually means. I mean, there's a case which I discussed with you recently where members got a high loading because of the age when they first started. Then they're in a more sophisticated, and you said that over the last 7 or 8 years they've hardly claimed because they go to the clinic. They don't even know about that particular medical aid. But then if you downgrade, you are giving up something. So just to unpack for us the difficulty or what you need to understand when you're upgrading or downgrading.
Firstly, thanks, Brian. I do think that, of course, the medical scheme benefit guides that you alluded to is exceptionally complex. And members who read this sometimes just get lost with the detail, which appears to be sometimes insufficient. So when we're looking at whether you should upgrade or downgrade, it starts out with, again, a comprehensive needs analysis. So we need to understand the member and the family's healthcare needs in terms of chronic medication, hospitalization, and so forth. And once you understand that, then it's best to then recommend an option to a specific member. Now, whether members are considering upgrading or downgrading, one needs to understand that the majority of medical scheme options offer hospitalization that is unlimited. So we need to understand that, you know, some offer at 100% of the medical scheme rate, others at 200%, and then there's a few at 300%. So judging on the level of hospital cover that you require together with your gap cover, that would determine firstly what is the level of hospital cover you require. Secondly, on the issue of the chronic condition, so all medical schemes provide for 28 prescribed minimum benefits, and of course 28 now, the 28th is including COVID. So again, only if you require chronic medication of a condition that's not one of that 28, you would consider a higher, more comprehensive option. So to simplify that, we'll start with a needs analysis. We look at the requirements for hospitalization, whether you have gap cover or not, your requirements for chronic medication, and that would determine firstly the level of major medical cover that you need. We now go to day to day. So this would be all out-of-hospital expenses, and we find that there's a variety of options. Some offer unlimited benefits for doctor's visits and prescribed medication. Others are limited to a medical savings account. And so it depends on exactly what the member's appetite is for networks or non-networks or to self-insure day to day. That would determine what the recommendations are. It's not an easy thing to do. But of course, if a member had, let's say, accrued savings for a number of years, that's one indicator, or a member has not reached the threshold, that's one indicator that you're technically overinsured and you should be looking at a lower option, but with the same level of hospital cover and chronic cover.
Because obviously one never knows, you know, you can be a very healthy family, one never knows when tragedy strikes or when there's absolute nightmare of health problems. But at that point in time, as you say, as long as you've got that hospitalization, you did make the point, 100%, 203%, 300%. We'll talk about gap cover in a moment, but it's very important for members to understand, because as I said in the opening, a lot of members have got brokers, but they've got no contact with the brokers because over the years, leads were given by various companies. They went and put the clients on the books, and then the clients dealt directly with the medical aids. And medical aids becoming very, very expensive.
Yep.
If you think about going back years, even for retirees, there were big tax advantages. Those tax advantages have fallen away, and those costs are rising. And if you want to keep your budget under control, you've got to control your medical aid expenses, but then understand very important to understand who and what you've got. But then we often speak about the rising costs of medical schemes. And the question really is, what factors are driving these costs?
So I think firstly is that we need to understand the lay of the land. So we have about 16.1% of the population covered by medical schemes, and this has remained the same for many years. So it's an aging risk pool, and that means the older you get, the higher the cost of healthcare. So we haven't really seen new entrants into the market, other than those that are employed by employers that enforce them to join. So that's the one aspect, is this aging risk pool. The other is that medical schemes, by virtue of legislation, must provide for what we all now know as PMBs, otherwise prescribed minimum benefits. So an option must already start to budget on around 866 Rand per month per member just to provide for PMBs. So that's the starting point. You haven't provided for anything else other than PMBs. So you can understand that that is one reason. The other, of course, is the technological advancement of medical treatment. So that just raises the cost. And then lastly, I think, is the shift that we see happening from day-to-day, what should have been a day-to-day expense, to hospitalization. And so what I'm saying is that people that are unable to, perhaps members that are unable to fund a particular treatment out of hospital, sometimes get hospitalized, and then the treatment is provided through the hospital benefit, and that type of scenario all drives the healthcare cost.
Clayton, the Competition Commission was looking at these costs. Have they released any of their findings?
They have, Brian, and like with, unfortunately, most things, so we had this lengthy period of the investigation, the findings were published, and regrettably, not much has happened since then. And one of the first things they found was that the regulation is sufficient, and you may know that we haven't finalized the prescribed minimum benefit review. The chronic benefits review is not reviewed. The low-cost benefit options fell by the way. So many years has gone by. We don't have a medical schemes reference price list. So that's what the Competitions Commission is referring to, that insufficient regulation. The other is that the benefit, you mentioned the guidelines, and I want the member guide, I wanted to touch on that. There is no specific standard between medical schemes. So trying to compare them is virtually impossible. And then, of course, the other was the non-healthcare costs. So we're referring to administration fees, disease management, broker fees. And then the other point, I think, was that there's only 3 private hospital groups in South Africa, and that hospitalization seems to be the main driver of the healthcare cost.
Clayton, the medical aids have to have a solvency of 25% of their reserves. So do different medical aids actually allocate more or less to their reserves depending on their solvency?
Yeah, they do. So again, here we see a very interesting scenario, because every medical scheme option must meet the 25% solvency. So when you look at certain medical schemes with a more comprehensive options with higher claims, their increases is typically much higher than the other options. So that's the first point. And yes, what would happen is that we find that it's a game. I would say a game, it's maybe not the correct term, but why I say a game is because they'll reduce certain risk benefits and kind of meet the market requirements in terms of increases. But in that case, you know, members are sitting with less benefits but paying a lot more for the following year.
So what has happened to all the low-cost schemes?
The low-cost schemes, so they still exist. So those schemes that have received exemption many years ago were told year on year that it's only another 12 months and then we'll bring in this low-cost benefit options. And lo and behold, come, I think it was January 2022, the Council for Medical Schemes released a paper saying that these primary healthcare options will now exist for until March 2024. So that means citizens can still join these plans. By March 2024, they'll hopefully transition to a type of low-cost benefit option within a medical scheme setting.
And is that, you know, we talk about people earning a lot less. Let's talk about staff at home, domestic staff, people who work in your gardens. And is that the type of scheme for them?
That's correct, yeah. So what you'll find is that those plans provide sometimes, depending on options, but a lot of them provide really comprehensive day-to-day benefits, but then of course they restrict hospitalization. So in order to provide a hospital benefit, it has to be for accidents only, so it can't be for illness, or it could be for trauma stabilization. If they do anything more than that, then they'll be performing the work of a medical scheme, and that's not allowed. The other reason why their premiums are a lot more affordable is they don't have to meet the requirements of the prescribed minimum benefit. So in other words, they don't have to meet that 866 Rand that we spoke about earlier. So they can come in at a lot lower price.
Clayton, you mentioned PMBs. I thought there were 275, is that, and you mentioned 28.
There's two sets of them. So we have 271, what is called treatment pairs, and that's all listed. You can get that off the Council for Medical Schemes website. And then there's the chronic conditions part, which is part of the PMB provision as a whole. So part of that would also be access to emergency treatment, life-threatening situations, potential loss of a limb, and those sort of benefits members would have in some waiting periods.
So Clayton, chronic is not always chronic. The fact that you get medication every month does not make it chronic.
No. And it also may not meet, it may not be one of that 27 conditions or 28 conditions. So, so let's just say you're diagnosed with a condition, it's not one of that 28, you'd have to pay for it either from your prescribed minimum benefit or out of pocket.
Because that's what people are confused about. They think that because I have medication every month, automatically I must get that claiming under my chronic. But you're now saying, no, if it does not form one of those 28 chronic, it may be every month, but it may not be payable, may be payable out of other parts of the medical aid.
Correct.
Have medical aids consolidated a lot of their different categories under one?
No.
You still got physiotherapy and psychiatry and all these different things separately?
Yeah, to a degree. So dependent on the option, if it's a capitation option, what you'll find it's segmented like you've mentioned. If it's an option that provides for a medical savings account, then it's all pooled together. But there's some options that do add additional benefits like auxiliary services and particularly for mental health and so forth.
Okay, well, we're going to take a short break. You're watching You and Your Money. When we return, one of the things I am going to be questioning Clayton about, and that is gap cover. How actually does gap cover work? How do you claim for gap cover? And then where does gap cover play a role in your whole medical planning?